question I've been getting asked in my school group is, what is the difference between a game object, a monobehavior, and a scriptable object? So I made this quick demo to show you how they all interact with each other, what the difference between them all is, and then we'll actually jump into the code a little bit too, so I can show you that part as well. So let me show you this quick demo that I made. It is a construction worker kind of person in this, this is the Cynthy Battle Royale pack, if you're curious. But really all we have is these three objects that are in the front, and as I walk around, I can press E to pick them up, and then once I pick them up, they disappear, and then they get added to this little UI screen here, and basically just show you what we just picked up. And I can hit that as well. And then also we are adding these to an inventory. So I have an inventory scriptable object, which I'll kind of show you a little more in detail in a second. But as I pick these up, so if I walk over to the sniper rifle and pick it up, it gets added to my inventory. And so this is a super simple use case of how to use all these things in tandem together, and it becomes really useful. So let me unplay that, and you'll notice a very important thing is that my inventory, which was nothing, it started with nothing, has now stayed present. So out of play mode, all the values that happen or change in scriptable objects do not get reset, which is very useful. And also this applies between scenes as well. So if you go from one scene to the other scene, a scriptable object keeps all of its data. It doesn't reset with the new scene. So it's super useful for saving data, which is going to be its main purpose. And so I'll show you a little bit how that works in a second. But first, let's talk about game objects, because that's going to be your most fundamental building block of building any kind of game. And a game object is really just anything in this hierarchy panel. So a camera is a game object, a player is a game object, and then anything underneath these is also a game object. So basically just anything in the hierarchy is a game object. And the game object is a container for other scripts. So if we look at the player, it has a bunch of what we call components in Unity, all underneath in the inspector here. So every game object is going to have a transform. That's, no matter what we click on, they're all going to have a transform on here. Even if they're completely empty, they're going to have, be empty with everything except for a transform. You can also, if I right click in the hierarchy and click create an empty, you'll see how it's pre-named to game object. And then it's just an empty game object with a transform, which basically just tells you where it's located, how it's facing, and then what size it is. And so you get position, rotation, and scale values. So I'm going to delete that one. And then back into player, you'll see we have a transform position, we have an animator, and then we have a character controller, which is how we move. And then we have a few different scripts that I've made. So we have a movement behavior, a animation behavior, and an interaction behavior. And so each one of these, you can toggle them on and off, and they will turn just that specific thing off. So think of, and these are all actually MonoBehaviours. So on this game object, we can contain several MonoBehaviours inside of it. So each one of these is a MonoBehaviour. And I want you to think of a MonoBehaviour like a single behavior. So MonoBehaviour. And so a MonoBehaviour should really only control one thing. So if you look in here, we have one that's controlling movement, we have one that's controlling animation, and then we have one that's controlling interactions. And then we have data contained within some of these. So the interactions has a player inventory data object, which is going to be our scriptable object. So that's how they all work together. So a game object is everything in your scene, and then game objects have MonoBehaviours attached to them in this inspector here. And then MonoBehaviours can have scriptable objects that they reference that is the data behind all of this stuff. And so the way you can basically add more. So I can have one inventory that has these things, but then I can also create more inventories, which is cool. So I can say right click, create scriptable object, and then I've just located it here. So I'm going to create a new inventory data. So I can say, so this one's just called new inventory data, and I can add whatever I want to this. So I can add like 3 sniper rifles to this one. There we go. And then in our player again, so we can say, okay, he originally had this inventory, which is one of each. And now we can swap the player to having this new inventory, and then it completely changes what's basically in the backpack, which is super nice. So and it's also really helpful for testing. So if you're going through and be like, oh, I want to, have all these potions in order to use, let's just have a potion inventory, and I can just drop that in there. And there we go. Now that's my current inventory. Super nice. Another thing that you can use scriptable objects for is basically showing what data we want to represent. So these objects that are called items, that I've named them items, are basically just scriptable objects. So it's just an item prefab. So if we go into our prefabs here, and I'll show you the code here in a second, but I can drag and drop a new prefab item here. Let me find it and then reposition it over in the right spot. Control Shift F will take whatever you've selected and put it where the camera was, which is super helpful. And then I'll reset the rotations there. And so now we have this item behavior, and this is another script that I've built. And also, if you want access to all of these scripts, just join the school community in there, and there's a whole, you can download all of the source code from any of my videos ever. So that little quick shout out there. But we can drop, I have created some item scriptable objects. So each item scriptable object has a name, a description, a little icon or sprite for each one of these. So we have armor, we've got an ammo box, sniper rifle, and it looks like a toilet paper roll, but it's actually a bandage. So each one of these has an item. We go back to our item scriptable object, and then we have the actual prefab that we want to spawn to actually represent this particular item. So in this case, it's this little armor thing that you can see on your screen here. And if I want to change this out, normally what you would have to do is, okay, I'm going to grab a different prefab, or I'm going to grab a different prefab, and then I want to, or if I want it to be, something that's different. So if I want to go in here and drop a, swap it out for an oil can or something like that I can still pick up, I would have to go create a whole new prefab. I would have to go add on this kind of interactable item script that I have, which basically lets me interact with that object with a sphere collider around it. There's a lot of things that you have to do, and you have to do this for every single pick upable item that you would have, which is not bad if you only have like 5 or 6 ones, but once you get into like hundreds, like these big MMO kind of games, it becomes a lot. And so the way we fix this, or make it easier for us, is we just create scriptable objects from them. And so I can just drag and drop whatever prefab I want to spawn in here, and it already will have all the correct things. So let me delete this barrel here. And so in this case, we've got the armor, and I'll be like, I don't really want this to be armor. I want this to be another sniper rifle. Drag and drop it. Boom. There we go. We have a script that will automatically replace the visuals and automatically, actually rename it as well. So so that this got renamed to sniper, or I can drop the bandage in there, and it changes out what visually is being shown, and it changes the name of this item, or we can go back to armor. Super nice. And if I wanted to create a completely new object, so you see we only have armor, bandage, and sniper. So if I want to create, I'll do right click, create scriptable objects, a new item data, and then we'll call this one ammo box, because I have a picture for an ammo box. So we'll say the name is ammo box. Description is it gives you more ammo. And then the sprite is going to be our ammo box icon. And then the item prefab is, I'll just search in here for ammo box. We're just using Cynthi's pre-made prefab in here. I haven't changed this at all. Where'd it go? There it is. And so we want to, I lost my scriptable object items, ammo box. I'll look for it in here. Ammo box. So same one that I was just showing you, this prefab here. And then, so this is completely brand new. I just made a new object like on the fly here. And then I can go into our armor here, which is currently, or an item, which is currently armor. And then I'll drop our ammo box in there, and boom, what do you know? Changes it to the correct prefab, renames it correctly. And then I can hit play, pick it up, and it will also populate correctly in the UI. So I walk over to it, interact with it. If I can point at it, there we go. And then ammo box gives you more ammo. And then there's the little icon for it. And then it's also in our inventory now. So if I go find our player inventory, I think we have this one. So now it's in our ammo box inventory. And so the beauty of this kind of scriptable object capability is that we can change it and represent that data however we want, wherever we want. So we can represent it visually, like physically in the world. We can represent it in the UI, and then we can also represent it in the inventory as well. And so you can access it from all these different places, which is super, super useful. And then also just, in the editor here, you can, swap it out very, very easily. So let's go look at the code and see how I'm actually doing this. Zoom in for y'all. There we go. So I'll look at the interaction, like I'll do a brief overview of all of these. If you want me to do like a more in-depth tutorial about specifically how I built this or how to, build other scriptable object things, feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I can do more in-depth tutorials. I'm planning on doing a lot more like coding, scripting tutorials, VR tutorials, all that kind of stuff. So subscribe if you want to see more. Anyway, so our interaction behavior, this is the script that allows us to walk up to things, press E, and interact with them. And so what we're doing is just saying how far can we interact from it, what layers can we interact with, and then we have a reference to our inventory scriptable object. So this is how you actually reference it in the code. So we have an inventory SO, which is really just, all it is a list of items. And then we have an item SO, which is what you saw that we were entering the info in for. So it's item name, a description, a sprite, and a prefab. And then, yeah, basically inventory is just a list of these. But then the cool thing about scriptable objects is you can do not just data, you can have different methods for it as well, different functions. So I can say, okay, I want this to be private. I don't want anyone to be able to add items. I want items to be added very specifically when I need them to be. And so I can actually expose that with a method instead of, just giving everyone access to items and letting them delete it or, do anything like that. So I can, allow adding items, removing items, having items, that kind of stuff. So back into our interaction behavior. So this is the component that goes on the player. So we have our inventory here. And then, so if we look at where it's being used, we'll say when we basically every update, we're going to check and see if there has been an interaction event happening. And then inside of this handle interaction, we check to see if the E key has been pressed. If it has, we're going to do a sphere cast. So it's like basically just throw a sphere around us to see if within a radius of between 0 and our max distance, which is our pickup range, which is 1 in this case, if we have if there's an item to pick up in there with the particular mask that we're looking for. So if we did press E and there is an item there, then we're going to get the item behavior off of that. And then using that item behavior, we can get the item data. We can get, basically we're just pulling the data off of that item and then we're adding it to our inventory. And then we're invoking a on pickup item, which basically allows the UI to see, hey, an item's been picked up, I'm going to update the UI. And then we're also spawning like a little particle effect here. So that's what this line does. And then we're destroying the particle effect after 5 seconds, and then we're destroying the item immediately. So that's basically how this works. And then I even got a use item script in here. So every time I press U, it will just take it off of the inventory. And right now it's not really doing anything else. As I'm going through this, don't worry about all the specifics too much. Just say, okay, this is how the interactions happen. So we have a behavior, which is located on the game object. And then this behavior has a reference to an inventory scriptable object. And then the inventory has references to the item scriptable objects. So a game object has MonoBehaviours on it, and then the MonoBehaviours have references to scriptable objects, and those scriptable objects are really just data and then things you can do to that data. Like, so in this case, adding things, removing things, that kind of stuff. And then each MonoBehaviour should perform one action, should have one responsibility. So in this case, interacting, in this case, moving. So we have a move speed, a rotation speed, which can also be converted to a scriptable object. So like, let's actually do that. Let me show you how to create a new scriptable object. So in this case, let's have a scriptable object for the movement. So we'll do a movement scriptable object. So I'm going to right click on scripts, add a new, and we'll call it movement SO. So usually we'll postfix the name of a scriptable object with SO, just so you're aware that it's a scriptable object. And then sometimes for this particular tutorial, I've added behavior to everything that's a MonoBehaviour, but sometimes, most of the time, we usually don't add the behavior part of it. So anyway, in the scriptable object, we want to inherit from scriptable object. And then we also want to grab this create asset menu here, and then we're going to call this new movement data. So that's what the name of this, whenever you create a new one, that's what it's going to be called. And then we'll call this movement data. So this is where it's actually located when you right click, create a scriptable object, movement data. And then the data we want is, we go back to movement behavior. I'm just going to steal these. So I'll delete them. and then paste them over here into our movement scriptable object. So we got a move speed and a rotation speed. And we're going to make these public too, because we want to be able to access them. So public and public. And so now back on the movement behavior, instead of referencing the specific values that we wanted, let's reference a serialized field, and then we'll do a private movement scriptable object, and we'll call it movement data. So usually you'll call the data that you're accessing data. And then we'll go down here to where we broke where we're actually referencing move speed. So we want the movement data dot move speed now is how you're going to reference the actual value. So we'll do movement data dot rotation speed. There we go. So this is basically just the method that handles the specific rotation every single frame. And then this is the method that handles the movement every single frame. So if we save that and we go back to Unity, you'll see on our player, we don't have our move speed and the other anymore. We just have a reference to a movement scriptable object. So I'm going to right click, create a new movement scriptable objects down in scriptable objects, movement data, and we'll call it player movement. And then we have our default values here, which is perfect. And then all we have to do is drag and drop the player movement over there. And now everything should be exactly the same, but with one cool exception, is now I can adjust the movement speed. So if we're moving around kind of slow, and if I bump this up to like 15, and then, all right, now we're moving really fast, which is good. Like that's perfect. That's what we want. When I go out of play mode, boom, we keep the 15, which is amazing. It's so helpful for when you're like changing stuff in play mode, when you're like kind of fine tuning, tweaking stuff. You can change it in a scriptable object and it will not change when you come out of play mode, which is amazing. So that's how you create a scriptable object and then reference it in the code. So I'll go back to the code real quick just to kind of show you one more time. So we're referencing the scriptable object. So movement SO is the name of the class here. So movement SO, so we're referencing that. And since these are both public, we can just access them. So the way we access them is down here when we need to update, or when we need to get the actual move speed value, we're going to do movement data, which is what we're calling this here. That's what the variable name is. And then we want the actual value, which is going to be the move speed or rotation speed. The move speed here in the movement one, and then rotation speed here in the rotation one. So I hope this helped. Like, I hope you were able to understand a little bit better the difference between GameObjects, scriptable objects, and MonoBehaviours and how they all work together. Let me know if this made sense, if it's a little too complicated, or if you want just a dedicated tutorial on scriptable objects and what they can do, or MonoBehaviours, or just anything that you saw. Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.